In 1095, Pope Urban II decreed that the center of the known world, Jerusalem, should be freed from Muslim control. Spurred by religious fervor, warriors marched unabated across Europe towards the Holy Land, leaving death and devastation in their wake. In the end, upwards of 30,000 Muslims and Jews were massacred in Jerusalem alone. This was called a holy war. These were the Crusaders.
Shalom, hello again, and welcome back to our Crusaders series. On this program, we're going to talk to a couple of interesting personalities. Later on in the program, David Bodein, a writer for the Jerusalem Post, will join us, and he has some ideas on American policy. He is an American living in Jerusalem. And then Professor Benjamin Kedar of Hebrew University, an expert on the Crusaders and their period and what they did here. And we're going to talk to him at a very interesting place. We'll go there right now. It's at Samuel's tomb, so-called. I doubt if Samuel's buried there, but it's a magnificent structure on the top of a high hill overlooking all of Jerusalem. So now the location. Professor, the Crusaders were awfully interested in this place. Tell me from the beginning, what happened here?
Well, we are on the spot where the Crusaders saw Jerusalem for the first time as they came here from the Mediterranean coast in June of 1099. And it was from here that they saw the city, and therefore they called the place Mount of Joy.
Up on this high hill, you can view the entire spectrum of Jerusalem.
So you can now.
And was it like this? Did it appeal to them as being like one of their castles on a high hill?
Well, at that specific time there was no castle and no building. There were ruins of a monastery, but later on they built here a monastery of their own because this place is considered by all three religions, Jews, Christians and Muslims, as the burial place of the Prophet Samuel.
Yes. Is there some truth to that? Have people determined it's a burial?
Experts tell you that there's no chance that he's buried here.
Yeah, there's so many sites in Jerusalem to specify a famous name.
Right.
But in any case, here they were. And what then went on?
Well, they fortified the monastery, and if you look around, you see remains of impressive fortifications, of a moat cut in the rock, very many buildings that were excavated during the last decade, and in the middle of it, the church.
And they were sincere religious?
Yes, that was a group of Premonstratensians from France who established their house here and stayed here until Saladin conquered the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1187. Later on, at some time in the 15th century, it was a synagogue, and still later it became a mosque, and now it is divided between a mosque upstairs and a synagogue in the crypt.
Isn't that interesting? Do the two factions get along when they come here to pray?
Well, I never heard that there were any incidents here. This doesn't mean that there are no incidents elsewhere.
Right. Well, if they worshipped here, the Crusaders and so on, our soldiers, the coalition, the British and American troops presently in Iraq, are referred to as New Crusaders. And you pointed out when we were talking before the program that this has been a name put on Western armies right along from the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in modern Arab political writings, you find this motif of the Crusaders of the 12th and 13th century being equated by modern colonialists, imperialists, Zionists. This recurs time and again in speeches, in writings, in newspapers. Very common motive.
But surely the Crusaders who came, first of all, came with a religious motive. At least that's what they published. And then when they were here, there was some bloody fighting. Mm-hmm. the Americans and British who are in Iraq, at least they have published that they're there to bring peace to the nation.
Yes, but you may say that nowadays the coalition has intended to liberate the Iraqi people, whereas the Crusaders were bent upon liberating the holy places, which is something quite different. There was also the aim to liberate Eastern Christians from Muslim oppression.
Oh, the people from the Byzantines who were here.
Yes, and other Oriental Christians who were living under Muslim rule since the 7th century.
They were having a tough time.
Yes, so there was a double, if you wish, a double aim: the holy places and the Christians in the East who were in the need of help.
Now, some say that this was the beginning of a terrible Muslim-Christian animosity. When these knights rode in here and began to fight.
Yes, but we should remember that there was going on fighting between Muslims and Christians right from the beginning of Islam in the 7th century. That is, the Muslims conquered Christian countries like Egypt, like Palestine, Syria, North Africa, and most of Spain. And this was a conquest. It's not that with the Crusades there starts Christian-Muslim animosity or fighting, but it certainly exacerbated prevailing trends.
It was going, and it didn't help much that they came here.
Well, for instance, if you consider the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, it led to a massacre of the Muslim and the Jewish population of Jerusalem. Now we know that it was not a total massacre, as some chroniclers present it. There were survivors, but still it shocked very many Muslims. And even in Saladin's days, when Saladin came and succeeded in putting an end to the Crusader kingdom, we hear that people say, Muslims say, we should treat the Christians now as they treated us back in 1099. Yeah. So the memory of that massacre was there all the time.
Well, let me ask you, you're a professor at Hebrew University, of course. Did they not draw some distinction, the incoming Crusaders, between Jews, who are, the Bible is their story after all, and Muslims who really are foreigners from another nation with a different religion?
One should remember that in Christendom, in Catholicism, through Israel, this is not the Jewish people anymore after Christ. Through Israel, Verus Israel, these are the Christians.
Replacement theology.
Yes. So this is one thing to remember. Another is that even before the Crusaders met the first Muslim, they killed very many Jews on their way, especially in the Rhine Valley in Germany. Yes. And the idea was, and we hear it both in Christian and Hebrew, Jewish sources, that the Crusaders say, we are going all that way to fight the enemies of Christ. Here are enemies of Christ living amongst us. Let's deal with them. But things were much deeper than that. Bringing Jews to the true faith, that is to Christianity, was considered by some, conceived by some, as a way to further the second coming of Christ. There was an eschatological meaning to it also.
In fact, the scripture, there's implications that should the Jews come to a messianic belief, this would start the messianic age.
Yes, yes. So those slaughters, those killings in the Rhine Valley on the way to Jerusalem were combined with a wish to convert the Jews to Christianity. If they do not convert, then we kill them. But you can see it also as an act of love. Crusading as an Act of Love is the title of a famous essay by a friend and colleague of mine, Professor Riley Smith of Cambridge. And this crusading as an act of love means that you express your love for fellow Christians. That is, you come to liberate those suffering Christians in the East and in Jerusalem.
Yeah, good for the fellow Christians, but very difficult for the Jewish people.
Well, yes, as I once said, being a descendant of those who were at the receiving end of this act of love, maybe I see things different.
Now the castles, they put gigantic castles on mountaintops. They built as if they were in Europe, deep moats. Did they not understand the terrain, or was this effective? It's so much man hours went into just the constructions.
I think that they understood the terrain perfectly. They chose the locations for the castles very well, and they built all these castles first and foremost for defense purposes, because we should remember that they constituted a minority within their own kingdom. We cannot give any exact numbers, but maybe we are not going to be very wrong if we say that for every Crusader who came from the West and settled here, there may have been 3 or 4 Orientals, be they Muslims or Oriental Christians. So they had to assert themselves, and one purpose of a castle is just to show that you are the master. This goes the same also for castles built in Europe in areas that are not under threat. And in addition, you had Muslim forces to the northeast, to the east, and to the west.
Professor, it's wonderful to talk to you. I mean, I could listen all day, but our time's limited. Thanks so much for coming.
You're welcome.
For a biblical perspective on what is happening in Israel and the Middle East, ask for Zola's free monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. Call toll-free 1-800-WONDERS. Zola's New Kingdom catalog describes his books, teaching tapes, and correspondence course. For Zola's free newsletter and catalog, please call 1-800-WONDERS. And Jesus said unto them, Do not be afraid. Go tell my brethren to go into Galilee. There they will see me.
It strengthens our faith to know that Jesus walked on the water and that we can call out to him.
It makes the whole scriptures come to life.
You know, our tourists, of course, are Americans basically, and are always surprised to see the Israel that we see, because the distortions by the media, CNN, New York Times want to mention every time because they're the worst offenders. They don't just get it wrong, they write it wrong on purpose. David Bodein, Jerusalem Post writer, believes most Americans don't understand even the impact of our government's policies toward Israel, which are policies he criticizes quite a bit, and he's very knowledgeable. Let's go to our interview with him. You have an article in Front Page Magazine, a rogue State Department, and you say the U.S. Constitution mandates that the U.S. Congress, elected representatives of the American people, must advise and consent the U.S. administration in matters of foreign policy. Nobody'd argue with that. Now you say the time has come for the American people to make the State Department policies accountable to the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, U.S. House International Relations Committee, the media, and the American electorate in at least 20 critical matters of Middle East foreign policy. The United States State Department has acted independently of U.S. congressional approval in its implementation of Middle East policy.
Correct.
They're running off by themselves.
Absolutely. When you have a situation where the people of the United States, represented by the Congress and represented by the White House, have a very clear understanding of Israel's isolated predicament, not wanting Israel to kowtow to the terrorism of the PLO. And you have that kind of situation, and it's across the board. When I visit the United States Congress, I hear liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans united in their support of Israel. But then when we come to watch the State Department policies, the State Department which supports an organization such as UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, which forces a whole generation of Palestinian Arabs to stay in refugee camps under the premise and promise of the right to return to their homes from 1948, which no longer exist. They left their homes in 48.
Yes.
Not because Israel wanted that to happen. It happened during the war. Instead of being resettled, the United States State Department, together with the Canadian Department of External Affairs and the European Union, support a system of keeping them in the camps and keeping the cauldron hot, and the expectation that they're going to replace Israel hot. And that policy has to be questioned, because it's not a policy. There was never a decision by the United States Congress or by the White House, hey, we're going to support the idea that the Arabs can come back to all the homes they left in Jerusalem, or the villages they left in the Galil, or the Negev. There was never a decision like that. But the State Department for the last 50 years has been pushing that idea in an undignified way. And the time has come for the American people who do want fairness to Israel to speak up and say, excuse me, we cannot support such a policy.
Okay, some Americans actually do. I mean, they oppose Colin Powell's statements. They oppose the idea of giving the Saudis a free pass. I'm saying some. Sure. I'm thinking some right-thinking Jewish people, some Christian Zionists. Some people don't buy into the State Department's thing.
Most people assume they have an attitude of that's the way it is. We're recording this interview on the 65th anniversary of Kristallnacht.
Oh, yeah.
Kristallnacht.
When the Germans broke windows and burnt synagogues.
What they did was to establish the precedent of what would happen in World War II.
Yes.
That they would kill off Jews and see how the world would respond. And the world responded, and even the world's Jews responded, especially in America, with nothing. Now, we are a generation later. We say on Passover, Ela shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu. Every generation, an entity comes up that wants to destroy us.
Yep.
And the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, is nothing more than an agent of the Arab League, funded through Saudi Arabia. And remember this roadmap that Mr. Powell talks about all the time, adopted March 30th, 2002, the day after the Passover massacre in Netanya. What's it based on? Paragraph 2, the Saudi plan, which talks about the right of return promoted through UNRWA, funded by the U.S. government and the Western European countries. The idea that Israel would be replaced by an Arab entity. And if you want me to show you the maps currently put out by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, Israel is eliminated.
Oh, sure. Now, look, UNRWA went in business back when the United States and even the communist regime in Russia welcomed Israel to the UN.
Correct.
I mean, how could we have it both ways? Here's a committee from the UN that builds refugee camps, apparently to resettle these Arabs and their children and their grandchildren, for heaven's sake, into homes that are supposed. This is like bringing back the Confederates to their plantations. Like the plantations are gone, and we're down a few generations. How could we have it both ways?
You cannot have it both ways. The problem is that people don't take what Arabs say seriously enough. As a journalist, when I was studying my field of journalism as a young man, I interviewed William Shirer, who wrote the book The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. He was the correspondent for the New York Times in Berlin during the Nazi era. And we asked him what it was like to hear Hitler's words and to report them. How could you remain neutral, I asked him. He says, I wasn't neutral, I was objective. I wrote down everything that Hitler said, reported in the New York Times, and people didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Since the advent of the Palestinian National Authority, every word has been accessible of what Arafat and his people around him have been saying, not only Arafat. And it has not been noted. Our agency, Israel Resource News Agency, is ready to dispatch speakers throughout the Western world to present to you what they're saying in the Arabic language to their people. Palestinian Broadcast Corporation, until 1998, funded through USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, not by some Arab kooks, but by Western democracies. Because it's only words. Words have power. And that's what we try to say. Words have power.
Let me take you over to Iraq.
Do we have to?
Isn't the State Department sort of guilty of the same thing, muddling things over, saying PR things? What's going on, really?
Well, the State Department pretends to be a middleman. They tend to be a meddleman. They tend to meddle in affairs and have no idea what's flying. Yeah. The idea that you can buy off people in the short run and think that will create allies.
Yeah.
That's how you create adversaries. Because what you have is a situation which is very clear. The State Department comes to Iraq, offers them oodles of money to fight Iran, builds up their military potential, and think that's it. They're going to return the guns, you know. It doesn't work that way. When you pay people off, they think in the Middle East, they think of you as a sucker. I grew up in America, so you know.
It's true in America sometimes.
No. If you pay, so you give somebody money for nothing. Yeah. You're going to fight. You're fighting the war against Iran, and they just take the money and say thank you, and they say, "Can we also have Kuwait?" And that is something. And remember when the American ambassador to Kuwait to Iraq said, "They don't mean it. It's not going to be."
The lady. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a whole thing of a lack of American understanding of the Middle East mentality. Yeah. We Jews understand Arabs. Isaac understands Ishmael. Isaac understands the Ishmaelite curse, that this is a wild man. A wild man. Yeah. But when you look in Genesis, how Ishmael is also the one who goes along with Abraham, according to our rabbinic sources, to receive the angels. To train him in the art of hospitality. So it's a wild man who knows how to be hospitable. When I interviewed Yasser Arafat for 3 hours, the man was wiggling in his seat, being so friendly, giving juice, giving coffee, the friendliest guy in the world. Now we go back to Iraq, we have to understand that Saddam Hussein and Yasser Arafat have been like this. But not only has Saddam Hussein been supporting Arafat, but Arafat has been supplying the troops for Saddam Hussein and now for the war against America. And guess where they're doing their military training? In the UNRWA camps in Lebanon.
Oh, boy.
UNRWA camps supported by the United States government.
All right, let me try to follow the money. So the American taxpayer pays taxes to Washington. Washington helps support UN UNRWA camps. The UNRWA camps train the foreign fighters that are going to Iraq and killing American troops.
Precisely.
Why are we paying for that?
Because you don't know about it. You know what my theme is, Zola? Yeah. Let my people know.
That's
people do not know what's flying. In a world of superficiality and MTV paganism, people have forgotten that God wants people to know. People to know about the land, about themselves, about responsibility. The United States government giving money to terrorists? Well, that was a decision by Congress. Was there congressional resolution XXX to support that? There never was. No. And same thing, did Congress ever decide they're going to support Saddam? Never, but it just happened. Short-term thinking, just to defeat Iran without thinking what was going to be next. What would you do with the guns in their potential? Do you remember that the Israeli government on June 10th, 1981, decided to create a few bombs over the Iraqi nuclear facility, which was being created by the Western nations. Not by the Arab nations, by the Western nations.
Yes. France especially.
Especially France. And Vice President George Bush at the time called for a boycott of Israel after that. Well, we beat around the bush. And I think Bush Jr. on it has been much appreciative for what Israel did.
Oh, yes. We'd be fighting a nuclear war, I suppose. So what's your hunch? What's coming up? What's the big picture? Are we going to establish democracies in the Middle East? Are we going to lose to the Islamists or what?
There's no question about it that George W. Bush is committed to democratization of the Middle East and to the defeat of the Arab totalitarian states that surround Israel. Okay. There's no question about it that the U.S. State Department opposes that. There's no question about it that the U.S. Congress is supportive of the president's position. The question is, for the viewing audience of this program, where are the American people?
Well, as we conclude our Crusaders series, you know, we're stuck with this label of Crusaders by the Muslims, our coalition forces are, and in some ways there is a similarity. I mean, we're Western soldiers coming from our own democracies, Christian nations, and attacking Muslims, and we don't really understand the local customs, and we're having a few troubles over that. I just hope our policies with Israel will be more benign, because we'll come under any number of biblical admonitions if we don't straighten those up. Zechariah 2:8 says, "For thus saith the Lord of hosts, after the glory hath he sent me unto the nations which spoiled you. For he that toucheth you," that's Israel, "toucheth the apple of his eye." So we need to look to Israel with the kind of love God does, and we need to Shalom Yerushalayim, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Our offer on this program is a DVD containing all 8 programs in our series, The Crusaders. Coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan are commonly referred to as Crusaders. This series takes a revealing look at the real Crusaders of 1,000 years ago and shows that the present accusation is unfair. 8 half-hour programs on 2 DVDs. The Crusaders. And you may also call toll-free for our colorful monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter. This free publication includes Bible lessons, insightful news commentary, Hebrew lessons, and personal notes from Zola. Call 1-800-WONDERS. That's 1-800-966-3377. Or write to Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225. You can also see our Levitt letters, TV programs, and national airing schedule at www.levitt.com. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you.